This is a presentation on how much is my stamp collection worth, because this is a question I get asked a lot. And people say, I've got really old stamps. They're from the 1940s and 1950s. And we will find that 1940s and 1950s are not really old stamps. And this is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club. Now, stamp collecting should be for fun, not an investment. And I compare this to having hockey tickets. Let's say you have season tickets to an NHL team, 2 seats for 20 games. You're splitting the season with someone else, and that's going to cost you $4,500 for 40 games. By the end of the season, you will have had fun on cold winter's evenings. You will have good memories of exciting games. And your ticket stubs will be worth precisely zero. That should be your same attitude to a stamp collection. Something you do for fun, for interest, learn a bit about the country you're collecting, learn a bit of history, learn something. Now, I would observe that most collectors I know spend way less than $4,500 a year. They would have a far lower budget than that. But they will all say they had fun, and particularly if you join a stamp club, you'll have good memories of the fun you had at the club. Now, on the other hand, if you build your collection carefully and in an organized fashion, it may be worth something, a little bit, not $1 million, but something. If it's a bunch of stamps unorganized in envelopes, not much, and a dealer isn't going to want to sort through all that stuff. If it's carefully organized in an album, probably more. And a dealer I know always, when he was asked to look at a collection and decide how much it was worth, first question he asked was, how many albums? Because if it's just a pile of stamps, he doesn't have the time to sift through them all, and he probably has most of those stamps anyway. So here is the most valuable Canadian stamp, and I want to talk about it because people always bring this up. It is the 12-penny black Queen Victoria from 1851. It is Scott Catalogue number 3 and used in the Unit Trade Catalog 2021. It's between $25,000 and $180,000. Gosh, I wish I had one, but I don't. 2011 Scott Catalog value is $100,000. Now, it's a bit of an interesting stamp, and the reason it's so rare is they printed 51,000 stamps, but only 1,510 were actually used. The rest were destroyed. And around 200, 250 are now known to exist. So all of this stamp that now exists are known. Someone knows where they are, someone knows what they look like, and the odds of you finding one are very small. One of the other reasons it wasn't used much, it paid the rate to mail a letter from Canada to Great Britain. And Canada at the time is Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec City, and not very many letters got mailed to the UK. Actually, 1,510 got mailed to the UK, and probably none were used within Canada. The rate was 3 pence to mail from Toronto to Montreal, and that's probably what mostly happened. 12 pence also at the time was a fairly large amount of money. Now, it's always cited, wow, it's the most valuable stamp in Canada, everybody should have one. Well, only 240 people, or probably less, have it. Anyone who owns one has it in a safety deposit box, not in their collection. Or it's in a museum or in the Royal Collection. The Royal Collection in the Great Britain, they've got a lot of these. But you or I don't have one, and as they were all mailed to Great Britain, you and I will never find one. As we're sorting through old stamps that were mailed from one place in Canada to another place in Canada, you won't find one. And you won't find one in Winnipeg because, I don't know, they ran mail between Toronto and Winnipeg in that time. Anyway, the next example that's often shown is the Victoria Jubilee issue. And it was a kind of a strange stamp. The post office decided they were going to milk collectors for money. and they had a bunch of stamps low value up to 50 cents, from a half pence up to 50 cents, of which they printed a fair number. But then they printed $1, $2, $3, $4, and $5 values, which really had no particular use, and they only printed 25,000 of them. So let's assume that all 25,000 of those still exist. Only 25,000 collectors of Canadian stamps can have an example. So it should really be worth quite a lot of money. And probably half of them at least were destroyed, were thrown away, whatever. So the catalog value hinged, and that's a very important difference. If the stamp is hinged, it's not worth anywhere near as much as if it is unhinged. So unhinged stamps are worth 2 or 3 times as much as a hinged stamp. And there's the catalog value for use, 1,000 up to $1,600. Now, the other thing you have to understand about catalog value for a stamp, it is for a spectacularly perfect stamp in all respects. It is absolutely perfect. It's got a perfect cancellation. Its color is perfect. It's perfectly centered. All the perforations are perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Now, issues that affect value. At the time, $5 was a huge amount of money. There was no particular postal use. 2 cents mailed a letter, half cent mailed a newspaper. So these stamps ended up being used for parcels and registered mail, and the parcel cancellation and the registered mail cancellation were both really messy and ugly. The other thing you have to be careful of, a lot of these stamps, because the value was high, were forged. So you have to be careful you buy one of these, it's not a forged one. Now, as I said, the newspaper rate was half a cent, and there was a half-cent stamp. If you wanted to mail a single newspaper with a single stamp, you'd put that on it. But newspaper printers, for instance, the Winnipeg Free Press, got bulk rates, and they ranged from 12 papers for a nickel, so you could mail 12 papers for a nickel, up to 288 papers for 30 cents. So mailing a paper was way less than half a cent. Now, what happened is a lot of the high-value stamps were used on a page. So there are pages, if you have one, they're really quite interesting and valuable. The Winnipeg Free Press, for instance, would go down to the post office with hundreds of papers, and the post office would decide that that cost $10, $12, $15. So they would, it was very convenient for them to put a bunch of these high-value Jubilee stamps on that page. The post office would then cancel them, and they would then mail a whole bunch of papers. So that's another way, particularly in Winnipeg, a lot of those stamps got used. Now, as I said, the cost of the whole set was $16.21 its pence, so $16.21 And the post office was candidly selling souvenirs. There was no practical use. They made no qualms about it. So people bought these things thinking they were going to be worth a whole bunch of money, and the value of the stamps quickly fell. Nobody had anything to do with a $5 stamp. So arbitrageurs bought these stamps cheap, less than face value, lots less than face value, and then sold them at a discount to newspapers. They then used them as I described on the previous slide. And it was a long time before the value rose above face value. The same thing actually happened to the U.S. Columbian stamp issued for huge amounts and not used, and the value immediately fell. And it took a long time before it went back up again. So here is a stamp that sold on eBay. This is the $5 stamp. And let's criticize it. Well, it has a roller cancel, Union Station, Toronto. But it is a crisp roller cancel, but it kind of obscures the whole stamp, so that brings its value down. The perforations are mostly okay. It's decently centered left to right, not perfect, but you can see there's a rather large margin at the bottom and small at the top, so it's not in any respect spectacularly perfect. Now in 2022, it sold on eBay for $266, Remember, its catalog value is somewhere between $800 and $1,600. Between eBay and PayPal, they take 16% roughly, so the seller got around $233 for the stamp. So $233 is somewhere between 27 or even 13% of catalog value. So catalog value, lots of people don't understand just exactly where catalog value comes from, but $1,600 for a used $5 stamp, it would have to be absolutely exceptionally perfect, beautifully canceled, not obscuring the design like this one, spectacularly perfectly centered, beautiful color, perfect perforations. Then it might be worth $1,600, but probably not. Here's another stamp which we can criticize. It's also a roller cancel, but what a horrible smudgy cancel. So that takes off the value. And this is even more off-center, left to right and top to bottom. And there's a perf bottom left corner there that's a bit short, so that's not good. Color's a bit faded, 10 to 20% of catalog value, maybe $100, less the 16% to eBay and PayPal. So maybe you get, what, $80 out of that stamp? Not $1,600. And remember, if you're selling this to a dealer, the dealer has to sell it on. So the dealer will be able to sell this stamp for $100. He's not paying you $200. He's not paying you $100. The dealer is paying you a bunch less than $100. But because they don't have a whole bunch of these stamps, they're probably prepared to buy it from you, but not for catalog value. So even high catalog value stamps not necessarily going to be sold for a lot of money. How about lower catalog value stamps? Stamps that catalog at 20, 40 cents a stamp. Now what you can do is you can buy bundleware, and these are from eBay. This is, what's that, 5 lots that I saw on eBay recently. 3,000 to 20,000 stamps. We start with Wildings. Wildings were the first Queen Elizabeth stamps based on a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Dorothy Wilding. 3,000 stamps sold for $25.88. That's 9/10 of a cent per stamp. The catalog value in both Scott and Stanley Gibbons in US dollars and Great Britain pounds, but they're about the same, 20 cents. So at catalog value, that's $600, sold for 4.3% of catalog. Old US stamps, 700, sold for $11.82, 1.7 cents a stamp. In the Mystic catalog, in the Scott catalog, they're going to be 20 or 40 cents. Mystic catalog is a catalog, a company that will sell you stamps. So the price they're prepared to sell you the stamp for is 65 cents. In their catalog, $455, 2.6% of catalog. Because if they have to make money when they sell the stamp. Some old Canadian stamps, 2,100 stamps, $4.73, 2/10 of a cent a stamp. Catalog value is 20 to 25 cents, $420, 1% of catalog. 20,000 worldwide stamps for $45, 2/10 of a cent a stamp. I'm guessing, difficult to tell what they all were, 20 cents stamp, maybe 40. If it's 20 cents a stamp, it was $4,000. If it's 40 cents a stamp, it's $8,000. At $4,000, it's 1% of catalog. Some 1980s U.S. stuff, 1,000 stamps, $8.99. Still less than a cent per stamp. Scott catalog value of those around 40 cents, so $400, 2.2% of catalog. And bundleware is bundles of 100 or so stamps. So these were, perhaps if it was 3,000 stamps, it would be 30 bundles of 100 stamps. So it would be at most 30 different stamps, perhaps 10 bundles of one kind of stamp, 10 bundles of another kind of stamp. Anyway, as bundleware, this is what dealers are going to pay, and they have lots and lots of these. So common material, even if it's older, and older would be 1890s and the 1910s is even what I would call older. Dealers have lots of it, and they will pay for it as if it is bundleware. Remember, catalog value is what you buy for. Dealers have to sell to you for more than they paid for it, or they go out of business. So it's not what you sell for, and what you sell for is going to be a fraction of catalog value. Further, oftentimes, when I'm buying from a dealer, they charge between 30 and 50% of catalog value. So they have to buy for even less. So if you value your collection at catalog value, all the old stuff is bundleware. 1,000 stamps, $4. And there's probably apocryphal story of a person who every week bought a $1 package of all different stamps, all different worldwide stamps. Did this for several decades, assuming that this was going to be an investment that he could sell and give a bunch of money to his kids, and was astonished to learn 20, 30 years later that the value of all these packets that he'd bought was still $1. So you don't collect to make money. You collect to have fun, collect because you're interested in something, not to make money. You do it for the same reason you buy hockey tickets. Now, about the sets. Now, the short set, there were 11 values between a half a cent and 50 cents. The catalog value is $600. The complete set of 16, 5 more stamps, the $1 to $5, is $4,000. It's another, whatever that is, $3,400. So a dealer will probably pay a lot more as a percentage for the full set than for the short set. And that applies to any set where it goes up to $1 or $2 or whatever, because they probably have fewer of the high value stamps, but a whole bunch of the low value stamps. So the low value stamps don't intrigue them, but when you want to sell a complete set of the Jubilee stamps, which is a catalog value of $4,000, they will probably pay you a bigger percentage for the 16 than they will for the 11. Now, what kind of stamps should you collect? What kind of stamps will you make money on? That's not what we're supposed to be talking about. Here are the catalog numbers from my 2010 Scott catalog. Now, this is the incorrect way of determining how many different stamps there are, but it gives you a close estimate. Sometimes they skip a number. Sometimes they issue 10 stamps and call them the same number, A to B, C, D, E, F, G. So the USA, 4,400 stamps, and they issue about 100 a year or so. Great Britain, 2,700 stamps. The problem with Great Britain is every time they issue a set, they have many, many different postal values, up to now £4.20. And they issue stamps for each of those values. And then they issue souvenir sheets. So they're issuing probably more than 100 stamps a year with all kinds of really difficult to get values. Canada, at least, they have a rate to the US and a rate to international, but they will only issue 2 or maybe 3 stamps of those values. And maybe even only the Christmas stamp will have those values. So you have to get that Christmas stamp. Now, the problem is the international rate of the Christmas stamp, probably all of them are used to mail to Great Britain, just like the 12-penny black. So you're never going to find one on the mail you get in Canada, and you're going to have to find one in Great Britain and buy it and have it sent back to Canada to get that value for yourself. So that's a particular problem for Great Britain, not so much for the USA and Canada. India, 2,300 stamps, that's reasonable. The USSR/Russia, 7,000 stamps. They obviously issued stamps not because they needed them. We can argue if Great Britain needed just under 3,000 and India just under 3,000, France a bit more, Australia, Canada. They're issuing stamps to sell to collectors, and we will see more of that in a second. Now, not to say that you don't want to collect Russian stamps. Maybe you do. There are 7,000 stamps if you want to collect them all. Not many of them are really expensive. So if you want to collect all Canadian stamps, well, you can't. You're not going to get the 12 penny black. But could you get a whole bunch of Russian stamps and buy them for relatively cheap prices and have a really interesting collection of Russian stamps? Other than the fact I don't want to do it right now. But yeah, you could do something like that. You could pick a country. Czechoslovakia, Austria, the former communist countries all issued loads of stamps. You could do that. They're really cheap to get. France, 3,700 stamps plus 700 or so semi-postal stamps, which the French use the same as they use the other stamps, so it probably should be 3,400 stamps. Australia, 3,199, and they only started issuing stamps in 1913, so compare that to Canada. They've got rather more stamps than they really actually needed, so maybe they're issuing stamps for collectors too, and all countries are. Canada, 2,300 stamps, 60 a year or so. So it's hard and perhaps very expensive to collect a complete country. Getting more difficult as people are issuing 100 stamps a year. Hard to get them all. Can't collect them anymore. They're not going to arrive on mail. You're going to have to buy them from someone. And as I said, some countries just print stamps to sell to collectors. Now some warnings, dunes and others. And not to say that you shouldn't collect these stamps. If you want to collect them because you think they're interesting and fun, for whatever reason, please go ahead. But countries like Ras Al Khaimah, Ajman, Saraja, Al Quain, and others, they are what are referred to as British trucial states. And they issued used stamps of Great Britain. So there are stamps called trucial state stamps, and some people collect them. All of those sheikdoms are now part of the United Arab Emirates. But these folks printed stamps with no domestic use and sold them to collectors. And they printed hundreds or thousands of different stamps. And so if Elvis stamps were popular, they printed an Elvis stamp. And if cat stamps were popular, they printed a cat stamp. They would print anything they thought collectors would buy. Scott Catalogue, for instance, does not list these stamps. So they are considered to be of very little value. But if you want to buy them and pay not a lot of money for them and collect them and look at them, that's fine. Up to you. You can do anything you want when you collect. The other warning would be countries with cancelled to-order stamps, CTO. And these are countries that printed masses of mint stamps to sell to collectors. And many of the communist European countries did that, and others too. They just printed and printed and printed and printed. So what happened, of course, is the mint stamps had a very low catalog value, and after a while people started to catch on. So then people said, well, maybe I'll collect the used stamp. But a lot of these stamps were never even put in use domestically, so you couldn't get an actual used stamp. So what they started to do was cancel them to make them look used, and these stamps are got a really nice, pretty cancel on the bottom corner of the stamp because they were trying to do 4 at once to save time. But the stamp will still have gum on the back. It's still mint because it was never actually used to mail a letter. So again, those are of limited value because they were just printed for collectors to buy. So just be aware of that if you want to collect them. So what is the proper way to collect stamps? And the answer is any way that is fun and interesting. We had a presentation at our club about one stamp. A club member has collected a particular stamp. Very interesting presentation. You could decide to collect Canada. Let's get a single country. Let's get all the stamps of Canada. Now you're going to have to make some decisions because Canada occasionally prints a souvenir stamp. They printed a $5 textile Canada flag stamp that no one ever used. I have excluded it from my collection because I don't think it's a real stamp. I think it's a souvenir. And you may decide to omit the really high-priced older ones. You're not going to collect the Jubilee issue. You're not going to get the 12 penny black. There isn't one to get. Or you're going to say, well, I'm going to start my collection in the Elizabethan era, or I'm going to end my collection in the Elizabethan era, or I'm going to start my collection after the accession of Charles III, which would be sort of like start collecting the stamps of Canada starting now. People collect topical stamps, any topic you want. The American Topical Association has lists and lists and lists of topics. Butterflies. If you like butterflies, want to have a collection of butterflies, have a little write-up on what the butterfly is, go for it. Make a presentation, have an exhibit. 16 pages of butterfly stamps explaining what the butterfly is, what the country it came from. Sure. An era. I have a collection of German hyperinflation stamps starting in 1920 and going to 1923. I found it historically interesting. I have a little collection of those stamps. They're not worth anything, particularly. Some of them are, but I don't have any of those. The other thing I found in our club is everybody collects it a little bit differently. I thought everyone would do it the same way. Well, no, they don't. Everyone's interest in stamps is a little different, or a lot different from everybody else's. They all do it the way they want. They all do it in a way that's fun and interesting to themselves. So the proper way to collect, again, fun and interesting. And if you do, your collection is something that's fun and interesting, it might be something that's fun and interesting to pass on to your kids or grandkids. It was my dad that got me interested in stamps. Wasn't particularly successful in getting my kids interested in stamps. And if you've got an interesting and organized collection, it just might be something of value, something that a dealer would pay you some money for. But don't do it for that purpose. Roihei Ishikawa was a businessman. He had a collection that he sold for $9.5 million in 1993. Isn't that fantastic? One of the most interesting collections of U.S. stamps at the time. And that was a record amount of money at auction for a stamp collection, 1993 and prior. Now, he had a lot of fun. He had a lot of really interesting stamps. He exhibited them, won prizes for his exhibits. Obviously, if they're worth that much money, not very many people have seen them, so it's real interesting when you look at it. However, because of currency fluctuation, even though he sold it for $9.5 million, he probably lost money. So when you hear about Roihei Ishikawa and his $9.5 million collection, he didn't make any money, just had fun. Bill Gross, businessman and billionaire. Current net worth, $1.6 billion. That's too big a number for me to understand. He had a collection which he started to sell in 2018, and he sold it for $47 million. Wow. Now, in context, that's only 3% of his personal net worth. So to some extent, $47 million is a lot of money to me, but not to him. And the other thing is he only bought really rare and expensive stuff that cost, single item that cost $100,000 that he later sold for $200,000. And he had a lot of really expert guidance from other people as to what would probably go up in value and what probably wouldn't. And even at that, when he sold his collection, there was some stuff that didn't sell. He asked a price and it didn't go. And then he gave the $47 million away to charity. So that's how much money he had, and that's how little $47 million meant to him. He would prefer the tax deduction more than the $47 million. He gave it all away. So we've talked a bit about the value you should expect to sell your stamps at, but how do you buy stamps? How do you get the stamps you need for your collection? So, for instance, if you collect used Canadian stamps, get all your friends, your place of work, everybody you know, please save all the stamps you get on letters. Now, that was much more effective a long time ago, but you should be able to get a fair number, a fair percentage of the Canadian stamps you need by doing that, and you will only have to buy a few of them. But if you're just starting out, how do you get all the stamps you want? You want to have a collection of Canadian stamps, let's say. Well, join a stamp club. And at the stamp club auction, every once in a while, probably every auction, a whole big bunch of used Canadian stamps, perhaps, will show up on paper. You'll probably be able to get them for $3 to $5. Okay? So take the bag home, carefully soak off the stamps. This is part of the fun. And that will improve the value of the stamps because they're now off paper as opposed to on paper. Throw away any of their damaged, any of their pen canceled, any of that. Take out the stamps you need, add a few more, and then sell the lot again at the next auction. And by doing that, if you want to collect used Canadian, used US, used, well, maybe not so much used Great Britain anymore, but certainly the older stuff, you should be able to do it by buying bunches of stamps at auction, sorting through it, and then sell it back. Add a few more, maybe put $2, $3 lots together and sell it for $3. But get rid of your duplicates that way, and you improve the value, and someone else at the club, particularly if you've taken the care to soak them off carefully, someone else at the club will appreciate that, and they'll take out what they need to improve their collection. They will add some more stamps and sell it on again, and it'll keep working for quite a while. The other way to buy stamps is, and I think you should hope to get the common ones at a club auction. Most monthly club auctions, over time, you will be able to fill up your collection quite nicely, and for not a lot of money. But if you're then deciding that you want the higher values, now you're going to have to start dealing with a dealer at a show, probably. And dealers will, the corner store stamp dealer has kind of gone away. And so dealers only show up at an annual stamp show or something like that. So if your club has such an annual stamp show, or even if you're not a member of the club, they're normally open to the public, go to the stamp show. And occasionally at a club auction, some of the higher value stuff you want will show up. Be very careful to be sure you know what it's really worth, and some people are looking for full catalog value, and they're not going to get it, or at least you don't need to pay it. And that way you buy the individual stamps you need. Set a budget, know the value, all the factors that affect conditions, centering, perforations, heavy cancel. And sometimes I even like that. If it's heavily canceled and there's a torn perf and it's an expensive stamp, I can get it for a value that fits into my collection, and I don't care. I have an example of the stamp, and that's all I'm really interested in. So understand those values, and that's how to buy stamps. So, to make the point, stamp collecting should be fun, so have fun. Have a budget. Decide how much money you're going to spend. Don't think it's going to be worth a lot of money. Look at it as if those hockey season tickets, and have fun, and then just maybe, after all that fun, you might have something that's worth a bit. So, thanks for listening.